All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, to the day one of the annual DBE Workshop and Networking Summit. If you're attending the ethics session towards ethical practice, then you're in the right place. My name is Kim Lobdell, and I'm the CEO at KL Engineering. KL Engineering is assisting the DBE office with the coordination of this conference. So I just want to do a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, I ask that you please type them into the Q&A box up at the top right-hand part of the screen. I'll read the questions towards the end of the session, and Dr. Russell will answer them. I'm also going to provide a link to this session's evaluation in the chat box at the end of the presentation, and I ask that you please take a few minutes to complete it before going to your next session. This session is eligible for PDH credits. In order to get a PDH credit, and I will also put this in the chat box, you need to just send an email to Rosalind Roberson at DOT, and I'll put her email in the chat box. And this goes for any of the sessions you could get a PDH credit for. You can send Rosalind one email and just say you want your PDH credits. She will verify that you attended this session. So make sure that you stay logged in throughout the entire session. And then she will send out email the PDH certificates in a few days. So now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our presenter for this session. Our presenter today is Dr. Jeffrey Russell. Dr. Russell is the Vice Provost for Lifelong Learning, Dean of Division of Continuing Studies, and a Professor of Civil and Environmental Engineering at UW-Madison. In his role as Vice Provost, Dr. Russell is responsible for leading the university's programs and services for lifelong learners and non-traditional students. Dr. Russell previously served as the chair of the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at UW-Madison and was a co-founder of the Construction Engineering and Management program. He received a BS degree in civil engineering from the University of Cincinnati and MS and PhD degrees from Purdue University. I'm not sure who he was cheering for in the game just the other day. He's a registered professional engineer in Wisconsin. Dr. Russell is a respected researcher, author, and editor, and he has been honored with a number of national and regional awards. His engineering research focuses on construction management, innovative project delivery systems, and construction automation and robotics. He is well known for his presentation and his work on various ethic topics. With that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Russell.
Thank you. Hopefully everybody can hear and see me, right?
We see your screen.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you just fine.
All right, and I'm going to leave my camera off if that's all right. And
we don't see the screen right now again, though.
Yeah, I'll turn it back on. Well, good. Well, to answer your question, that was a very difficult game to watch. I was kind of pulling for Purdue, but my heart's always at UW-Madison in the state of Wisconsin. So, and by the way, you will note that Kim mentioned that I was also from Cincinnati. So this was a double whammy to see the loss in the Super Bowl, which was kind of a oh well, the Packers weren't there, and I didn't win on the Bengals side either. Well, let me first thank all of you for the opportunity to come and visit a little bit. As Kim, thank you for that kind introduction. And I've been fortunate over the years to be able to participate in this particular summit. My experience is you don't tell Rosalind no, and I say that in a kidding way. She's a great person, and I think this is important work. As Kim indicated in my introduction, I'm spending a good deal of my time thinking about access and education and the role of technology to help us advance those that have been underserved historically in various educational offerings. How do we work to address some of those inequities and try to improve access and opportunities for folks? So today I'm going to talk about towards ethical practice. Kim indicated if you got questions, use that feature to the top right. If you want to put something in the chat, Kim's going to be helping me to monitor that, and will likely well, not likely, she'll interrupt me, and if you have a question, I can try to address that. So the goal here, in terms of starting out, and as Kim indicated, I'm asked quite a bit these days, since it's been a requirement to keep your license in the state of Wisconsin as a licensed professional engineer, to accrue 2 hours of ethics training every other year. I've all of a sudden become quite popular in terms of thinking about and reflecting on and offering these kind of workshops, if you will, in the sense of engaging around ethics. And the title of the talk is explicitly stated towards ethical practice for a reason. And the reason being is that, we are all working towards ethical practice. And I think one of this slide here shows, a reasonable goal from this effort is that, to recognize and own that we all are not perfect. If we think about what it means to behave ethically, and we commit to acting ethically, uh, that commitment process increases the chances that I likely, when faced with ethical issues, will consider them and will move to make the best decision under the circumstances. You might want to think about ethics also. All of you likely are in organizations that have to manage risk. Clearly, ethics is something that you need to be thinking about that has risk. In today's world, in terms of how you manage the brand of your organization, how it's perceived by others, these kind of things are really, really important. So I think thinking about ethics from the perspective of risk management, and recognizing that when significant breaches occur, there are clearly implications from that. And so we just need to be thinking about that. Again, this is the intent here is not to make all of us feel bad or to feel like we're unethical. It's really to help us engage in this topic and to think more deeply about it, to help us do our work in an ethical and professional manner. Well, my thumbnail sketch, and if you've heard me speak on this before, you can, while we're talking, some of you might even be Googling the National Society of Professional Engineers Code of Ethics, or if you happen to be a civil or mechanical engineer, you'll Google ASCE or ASME and get their code of ethics. And, that these professional organizations, in concert, if you are licensed, there's a set of expectations in terms of how we conduct ourselves. And, there's the canons, and there's a set of rules or behaviors, if you will, that are accepted and not accepted. And, what I like about the slide that we have up now is that I just like the simplicity of this, in the sense that from a practical point of view, ethics is involved in doing the right thing, even when it costs you more than you want to pay. It's not what I could do; it's really what I should do. And I really like this as a practical definition, in part because my lived experience has been, you can have laws, you can have rules, you can have regulations, you can have policies, but it is impossible to articulate all set of circumstances, of the contextual situations under which we all find ourselves, and define every appropriate behavior under the set of circumstances. So I think, again, ethics as a as a practical point of view is the right thing. And I was asked the other day in a meeting, in a presentation like this, well, who decides? And in my judgment, in the end of the day, we have laws, and we have an expected rules, if you will, if you want to say those are part in the code of ethics, from, let's say, the National Society of Professional Engineers. But your organization and the community that you're involved with also have elements of this. But in the end of the day, and personally, you have your own set of ethics. But in the end of the day, these become individual decisions that we choose to make or choose not to make. So again, I think that the key point here is this is a somewhat simplistic definition, but I think it's very powerful in its elegance of simplicity and practicality. Now, when we think of unethical behavior, and one of the things that I would say I've learned in the last 30 years, and as Kim was very kind in the introduction, I've had the privilege to be a state employee for the last 32 years and to work on a variety of research projects. And I have seen, at least in the project management space, which is where I've spent a good deal of my time, of a shift away from not just technology, or not that we don't focus on technology, but really this notion about behaviors and really trying to think about that, whether we're talking about safety, whether we're talking about cost and schedule impacts. I mean, so I think that this point here of behaviors starts to really get us down to not these broad kind of discussions, but I think gets us down to real practical kind of things that we might want to think about. And so, as all of you reflect on your own practical experience, you might think of unethical behaviors that you have observed or you have seen play out. And there's a number on this particular screen moving from left to right. You'll see a lying. We'll come back to that. Fraud, bid rigging. The states had an issue with that at one time. Conflict of interest, sexual harassment, discrimination, bribery, and ignoring public policy. These would be things that one would articulate or would define as things that would be unethical. Now, if you think about things that are ethical, we tend to think of noble professional behaviors and conduct. We tend to think about the at the core honesty, and we think about a focus on safety. Your industry, as I've said in other settings that have involved transportation professionals, I think you're in one of the most tough environments that you could imagine as it relates to public health, safety, and welfare. As you think about most of your work is undertaken under live traffic. Sure, there are some occasional projects where you don't have as much, but the interface of the construction operation with the traveling public and the interaction of that, I think makes this space an incredibly complicated and difficult challenge, I think, from a safety point of view. And you'll think of some of the other things on here: reporting wrongdoing. That's, if you think about it in the DEI space, more specifically, that's not, I mean, more specifically, that is not a stepping aside and not being an active participant. In other words, a lot of us and bystanders, I can speak for myself, over my career where I've let things go and I should have stepped up and I should have stepped in and said something, and I didn't do that. And I think, and I regret that. And but I think that is an ethical behavior, is that when things don't appear to be right, somebody steps in and is willing to help make a difference. I've had a couple of conversations with some of the various labor organizations, and I'm doing some work in the city here in Madison with Operation Fresh Start. And I continue to be appalled on the construction side on how we have such few diverse labor and other craft, iron workers, for example. And then I hear stories about how some are treated on a job site. It just, to me, is very surprising and disappointing. And I think we can all do better in that, because I think we need everybody. When you think of a vibrant and um, diverse, inclusive workforce going forward. So these are some things that we think about in terms of ethical behaviors, honesty being the core. Now, I've tried to, with some feedback from folks over the years on this presentation, or the version of the elements I have here. People get the impressions that everybody's unethical, and that's, if you have that perception, that's on me. I'm not communicating very well. Uh, 99%, probably higher, of us are ethical and we strive to be ethical. Again, I said we're not all perfect, or let me just say I'm not perfect, and I've definitely made mistakes. But I think that the point here is that most people behave ethically, and I think our challenge going forward is that we never step in the same river twice, and things continue to move, things continue to change. What's accepted practice today perhaps wasn't accepted practice 25 years ago. So these are things that why I'm suggesting ethics should be top of mind, in addition to it becomes a risk management element as we think about it too. So, a logical question then is, and all of you with your own practical lived experience know that, we're under a lot of pressure. So, the basic question on any of these could be why? Why should I care? Why does it matter? And I think in this case, what we want to understand is that um, the context, the set of circumstances, and the situations that we can find ourselves in individually can make decision making very difficult, and can put us in positions to consider, perhaps even choose or select unethical behaviors. And a lot of that's the nature of the work that we do when we're helping build the infrastructure that allows the mobility that we see in this state and in this country. There's pressure because, at least to my understanding, we're not working on projects that have unlimited time. They have unlimited budget. They have, select whatever quality procedure you want to. That's just not the case. We're in a high intense project based industry that is very intense. And so I think as we think about that, you might say, well, where do the pressures come from, and how does it manifest itself in terms of decision making? um, as you think about this, and this graphic, perhaps some of you have seen it before, you can reflect on your own experience. But when you look at the various elements here, think about authority. Clearly, and if I've learned anything in terms of power differentials and who has the built-in power, whether it's stated or not, I think most people understand that. So authority, and being mindful of that as you move in places of higher responsibility and accountability, that what you how you say things, what you expect, and how those get communicated really matter. Because my experience has been people don't work for in organizations and work for other people, and their goal in the morning is not to get up and disappoint them. We're all committed professionals wanting to do a good job, build our own career. So we have to be mindful of the authority pressure. You know, are we putting ourselves in a position to ask our people to do things that are on the line? When you think about projects, and as I said, the time pressure, are we trying to do work too fast or in an unsafe manner that can put ourselves at risk? Now, that might appear to be a nice practical kind of question to kind of pontificate on, but the practical realities of dealing with that are difficult in the day-to-day work. Peers, psychologists tell us that we're strongly influenced by role models and people we admire and respect, and our peers. And so as you think about folks that you interact with that are your colleagues, your close peers, um, just be mindful that where they go can have influence on where you might choose to go as well. And then I've mentioned how important time is in the element of whatever your particular role happens to be. So I think the practical issue here is that, and as I did, I couldn't get the exact reference, but there was a study in the Associated General Contractors of America (AGC) that at least for a project manager, the data suggested that they make over 50 decisions a day. Over 50 decisions a day. Think about that. Think about yourself, the number of decisions that you make every day. Sometimes, it's split seconds that you have in order to make those decisions. And in some cases, when you're under a lot of time pressure, perhaps you don't see the full context of or the implications of a particular decision that you might have. So again, this is something to be thinking about. I mentioned the pressures by intense or pressures, but let's look at them by intensity. So here you can see on the bottom left, violating the laws all the way to the far, if you're going clockwise to project timeline. And I think, these are things that are based on a study. There's a group, a national business ethics survey that goes out to the construction industry. And you'll see a number of these things that you could probably relate to. I've already mentioned, I don't think people get up and they don't want to do a good job. I think we're all trying to grow in our career. If you work on the private side, I hope that those companies are successful. If they're not financially successful, they're not going to be around. So I think these are important things that, are really a practical matter. Personal financial obligations, I've seen this firsthand, especially recently in the pandemic, as more and more pressure comes, elderly parents and caring for them, a sick child for perhaps. In some cases, it can be an addiction problem, gambling, for example, or alcohol, that can create personal financial obligations that someone might say, "Oh, that I would never do that," or you might say, "Jeff would never do that." Well, it you have to think about the underlying personal set of circumstances, and as that pressure grows, I think that, my lived experience has been is that I think it's easier to rationalize some of these things. Oh, he's a good person, or she's a good person, or they do good work, or the organization is really important, these kind of things. And I think we can talk ourselves into things that might not be ethical. And, one of the things that I've mentioned several times when asked to speak on this particular topic, I don't make statements like I would never do that. I've seen this repeatedly where people will turn around and say, oh, this company or this person or this set of circumstances, I'd never do it. You just have to understand the context and how powerful the situation can be. And I think this is the goal. The point here is to be mindful of that and be aware of that, such that, before you make a split decision, you actually a split second decision, you actually think about it. So the point here is that, there's just a number of pressures, things I'm telling you about, but what I'm trying to suggest is to heighten your awareness on some of these kind of things as a practical matter, because they clearly are there for sure. Now, let's go ahead and look at the next slide here in terms of the key point that I want to make here, probably more than anything, is the mismatch between the observed violations to the second column to the reported, and the mismatch that you see. They're almost flipped. But the bigger thing is the ethical violations. Um, I'm back to the behavior piece of it, abusive behavior, using language, treating people in an inappropriate way, conflict of interest, failing to correct health safety risks. I mean, safety is everybody's responsibility. Speaking up when you see something that doesn't make sense and asking questions like, hey, let's make sure we're taking a look at that. That's really, really important, because we have to be watching out for everybody. Wasting and mismanaging or abusing company resources. Now, there's a number of them in here. In lying, I mentioned lying as an unethical behavior. The old saying of it's the white lie, if you will, but lying to employees, subcontractors, owners, clients, customers, discriminating against employees, abuse, substance abuse, these kind of things. I mean, these are practically real things that are seen in different sets of circumstances. And particularly as it relates to I mentioned the construction operations where you've got a lot of decentralization, meaning you have people in isolated areas that perhaps don't have all the same checks and balances in them as perhaps maybe a home or a central office might be. Um, I think you might potentially see more variability in that. But again, these are some more concrete things to actually be thinking about when we talk about ethical violations. So I decided on this one to take a little different turn here and talk about, and we'll pivot to some of the ethics as it relates to, and this is a bit more construction centered, but engineering, planning engineering, and construction related. And what I want to talk about is the context or in the context of contracts. So Here's some practical realities of a contract. It defines rights and obligations of all the parties. It allocates risks, plural, time, money, exclusions, these kind of things, access, um, certain material, those kind of things. And it sets out a number of administrative processes that must be followed. So the third point assumes that not all projects as designed and as bid are as constructed. So, in other words, there likely might be change. So, let's try to understand that a little bit more. So, what are the important contract terms? Well, what is the scope of work? That typically for sure means what's in, but it also means what are the exclusions. So you have schedule, there'll be concerns around progress payment and measurement, how changes in the work will happen, how notification periods will occur, who approves what at what financial level. How do you think about delay and damage related to delay? And we'll talk a little bit about that. The need to have project records or documentation is important. We know that in the quality and safety world, but definitely in terms of that's an important contract requirement. Then we need to comply with all the appropriate laws. Well, this slide here shows four major elements that drive project change. There might be more, but I would say historically, if you talk to people that do a lot of work in change orders or change work, they're on dispute review boards, a various number of roles that they might have as a mediator, for example. What they'll tell you is that broadly, change occurs in four categories. One is changed work. And by that, what it means is we're changing the scope of the work. So in other words, we're either adding or subtracting. Could be material quantities, could be the length of the bridge. I mean, there's a whole number of things that can happen here where the actual scope of the work changes. Now you can have differing site conditions. This is not anything new to for sure the Wisconsin DOT or the transportation field. And clearly there'll be means by which, how that risk is allocated. Who did the subsurface investigations? What are the set of assumptions? What did you assume that you were going to encounter on the project? What did you actually encounter? And then there occasionally can be errors and omissions, just things are missed in the planning and in the engineering as part of the project. And then the final one is interferences or performance impact. The performance impact can be the contractor themselves, but I think also depending on back to pressure in time, what you can see sometimes it is that as we say in project management, a project gets delayed one day at a time, or becomes late one day at a time. And depending on the sequence of the critical activities, you tend to have what is called compression, or might result in acceleration at the end of the project to meet a particular substantial completion deadline. So that tends to be challenges. Now, in all of these, A and B, change in work and differing site conditions, one of the key principles in the change work is to make sure the owner, to the extent that the owner agrees, that makes it a lot easier to have the negotiations. To the extent that it doesn't, that becomes more problematic. A and B tend to be easier. C, there's usually a lot of questions. And then D, the question is, well, why'd this happen? And does this really create any additional value for the client? Now, this is, they're going to post this, and this is not an eye test, even though I just am going to have to go in and have my eyes checked. But I'm only showing you this because my lived experience has been that, few folks really think about this. And the goal here in this matrix is to show at the top the job, and on the y-axis, if you want to refer to it as that, is the way we build the work. And so what it is you got four quadrants here: quadrant 1, 2, 3, and 4. The point here is that the way we build the work remains the same. So that's the way we bid it. Okay, so that's quadrant 1 here, and that's quadrant 3. But in 3, it's different. It's forced to become different. And this is where you're going to get changes. So when you're thinking about it from a vendor or a contractor's point of view, they're thinking about how they looking at the risk of the job, the flow of the job, the general sequence of the material, labor, and equipment that they're going to use. And, is it the same or is it forced to be different? And then at the top, the question is, and, again, I'm not an attorney, just to be clear. The job, if the job remains the same and you're in category or quadrant one, you're in good shape. If it's forced to become different, you move to three, and you're going to deal with delays and disruptions and unforeseen. But if the job materially changes, that then puts you in a totally different set of circumstances. So, we're the challenge here, and you'll hear me talk about this later in trust. If you're in quadrant four, that's a tough quadrant because if it becomes cardinally, that's a legal term, a changed project, and the flow of the work becomes different, how that gets managed is going to be really, really important. So as you think about this, the big thing on change management is one has to think about the cause, where the liability is, relative to the impact or the effect, where the damage is. And so you have to think about cost and time and understand causation, entitlement, and quantification. So these are the critical terms. So when you think about, so again, I'm trying to where I'm going with all this is we're going to get to some of the underlying ethics that we see that rear their head as it relates to changed work. So when we're managing change work, what we have to the far left is you've got the baseline, the contract, your set of assumptions, scope, method, schedule, budget. Over here to the right, points 3 and 4, you've got conditions change. They change. You've got to record them. You got to understand what your actual scope, methods, and time. And what you're trying to do is to balance the entitlement part and cause within the quantification or the effect. And it's the baseline is your best effort to estimate the job, and the far right is then the actual. And so what this diagram shows is, to the extent possible, what you want to try to do is you want to deal with problems and disagreements at the project level. So this, when you look at project managers, then you got senior advisors, all the way to litigation. What you're trying to do, and across the claim process, you're going from problem to disagreement to dispute to conflict to litigation. Those are the five states when you start to think about what an outcome can be relative to a change. And the point is, if you can solve the problem or you can work the disagreement, you want to do all you can to not get to a dispute, conflict, or litigation to the extent you can do it. So when you think about ethics around change, and we can talk about other related aspects of ethics too, but there are a number of things that you could think about. Um, I've frequently heard this one, and let me preface this by again saying I'm not in the back pocket of the DOT, and I'm not in the back pocket of the contractors, and I'm not an attorney. But what I am saying here is, if you think about ethics, doing the right thing, even when it costs you more than you want to pay, or what you should do, these are questions that we would ask around changed project conditions in ethics. So the contractor discovers errors and omissions in the design documents during the bidding process. What does the contractor do? Owner notified of a major error in the design documents 24 hours before bids are due. What does the owner do? Engineer releases a project knowing design is not fully complete, tells the contractor, bid it the way you see it. Is that fair? Is that the right thing to do? Overstating a company's work capacity during the pre qualification process. Is that ethical? We're on a project where we have change, perhaps some disputes. The engineer is unresponsive to notification of change of impact of conditions from the contractor, the suppliers, or subcontractors. Does this build trust? Contractors' entitlement and quantification of changes are unfounded or unreasonable. I mean, is this really being done in good faith? Contractor submits fraudulent claims, but the basis of the claims are misrepresentative of the actual project facts. So is that fair? Is that ethical? So those are just a few to think about. Um, if you think about how things really unfold on an actual project, you can have what's called a force majeure. I think, well, my intuition is, given the changes that we see in terms of weather patterns and some of the different things, Um, you know, you can have extreme or severe weather events. So let's say in this, the first one, it says you got a major rain event, wipes the contractor out. I mean, how's that going to be processed and thought about in the contract in this case? Is it a reasonable use of the force majeure clause to extend, excuse me, the time for the contractor? A subcontractor doesn't maintain nor provide access to project records and complicates auditing the incurred project costs, particularly when you're trying to quantify change. The engineer is paid and has multiple engineering subcontractors working for them. They're paid, but they delay payments to other parties. Is that right? Is that ethical? Is that legal? Contractor observes unethical behavior by owner representative. Do they report it, recognizing that there can be repercussions, in terms of future work on with this particular issue? So change occurs on the job, and then they'll make reference to this time impact evaluation that will need to be done. Well, if it's substantial and significant, who pays for it? What's the time frame, and how does that all play out? And then, I've seen this personally. I've experienced it in different contexts. Instead of one of the parties, instead of working it out at the project level, they go over everybody's head. So they go to an elected official, or they go to the state, construction engineer directly. And then all of a sudden you got senior management involved in a project dispute. I mean, what are the consequences of that? And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about trust. So here's the point. And this using in this particular case, ethics around change project conditions. Whose standard of care? How do we think about that? What's fair? What's right? What's reasonable? Are we problem centered, or are we people centered? Are people part of the problem? And we've all been on projects where I think the latter can be a challenge, but somehow we've got to navigate through and work on that. Are ethics absolute and fixed in time? Probably some elements are like what I'd call hard or bright lines. And then there's a lot of it that's in the gray. A lot of it's in the gray. And so, what does that mean for us individually? What does that mean for your project, your organization, for our industry and our profession? All situations are not equal. Some are low value, low impact. Some are high value, high impact. And, my observation on some of this is that sometimes, you can kid yourself that the low value, low impact things don't matter, but cumulatively they can add up that you get more courage. Whereas my friend in the business school says when they assess, cheating, um, they said, "Wow, once I figured out how easy it was, it got easier to do again and again." And I think there is something to that we all, or at least I would say personally, I think about, because I think that is important. Are today's accepted business practices in how we manage risk, are they similar to the past? Are they evolving? Are they changing? Is it getting better? It's a question. I think it's a fair question. And I think if you're looking at, if you've got a challenge on a project and you're between a problem and a disagreement, things they tend to grow with time. And so I think individuals, the inability to sit down and negotiate and try to work through those tough problems, it's not like wine. It doesn't get better with age. So what can we do about this? So let me offer some practical advice here. I think, we've got a few more. I think we're just about at 45 minutes. So I'll wrap up with a couple of things here, and then let's take some questions. Um, One of the things that, back to what I was saying earlier about lying, and let me just say, having been around for a while, you start to step back and think about things a little bit. And so, if I could use the term, what am I trying to do in this in terms of raising trust? This seems to be awful old fashioned, very personalized. And I guess what I'm trying to say, after 40 years of thinking about and seeing some of these things, particularly the things of honesty, dishonesty, lying, some of these kind of things, I continue, and being involved with project teams that have underperformed, and ask myself why, what happened. I think trust, is like super, super, super important. And so the question here then becomes, what is a definition of trust? What does that look like? And one author has got a definition here, and that says choosing to make something you value vulnerable to another person's actions. I think that, to me, that's a you know i- that is I think a definition that causes me anyways to be much more reflective and to think about some of these kind of things, perhaps in a different way, my lived experience in this space is trust is to human performance what water is to human health. I mean, absent of trust, I think it's really, really tough. Sure, we can muddle through and we can get things done, but it's not the same as when it's present. So, what are some things that are, what are attributes or distinctive characteristics of trust? Sincerity, reliability, competence, and care. Those of you that work in lean, if you've seen that in manufacturing or perhaps in construction, you'll talk about reliable promising. And a lot of this is, your sincerity, your reliability, your competence, your overall care. And in particular, again, I mentioned I like these 2x2 matrix. So what you have here is trust doesn't work without competence. Okay, this is why it's really important as professionals, all the things that we do. This is why lifelong learning is important. This is why us continuing to understand who we're serving in terms of clients and stakeholder groups, that we continue to learn and grow our competency based, because trust is about competency, but trust also on the or the y axis here is about character. And so the challenge which you have is low on this part of quadrant two, high on quadrant one, and this is competence. And then if you look at trust, you got high here in two, but you've got low in four. And so the big challenge is that the high, you're in good shape. So quadrant one is where you want to be. You want to focus on leveraging strengths. You want to have transparent, positive, supportive communications. You tend to jump on challenges or mistakes early. You work to inspire and create. If you're in low quadrant four, I mean, that's a tough space to be in. Um, Low character, low competency. I mean, the other challenge is it takes a lot of competency to correct for character issues, meaning not, the whole reliability, the sincerity piece, those kind of things. So I think, you know, as the note says at the bottom of the slide, there is no direct route from quadrant four, low, to quadrant one, high. So I think these are just things to be thinking about in terms of character and competence. Several other the folks that talk about trust, they talk about it as a dividend as opposed to a tax. So the question is, does it contribute constructively to the collaboration, to the innovation, to our own personal development and growth individually? Or is it a tax? I mean, it's just hidden agendas. There's just a lot of dysfunction, dissatisfaction, if you will. And again, you'll see, more and more systems put in place to deal with some of those taxes. But um, I'm not saying that it's easy to do on all things, but I do think an important element of ethics is trust. It is about competence, and it is also about character and how that gets played out in particular situations. So let me just end here on a couple of notes here, I mean, two practical slides, and then we'll open it up, Kim, for any questions that folks might have. One of the things that I've got here is, the modeling of ethical behavior. I think one of the challenges that we all have or opportunities, is to think about people we admire and respect. Who are our role models? How do we think about and what things are we doing that can have a positive influence? How do we communicate the value of ethics? My experience has been these are difficult topics to talk about. They're like talking about politics and religion. It's very difficult to talk about these things without it appearing that you're trying to tell someone how they should believe, how they should act, what they should do. And I think there's just a lot of practical set of or situations that we can learn from. Then how do we make it clear in the organization we're going to reward and punish ethical behavior, and be thinking then about how do we shape the culture, the ideals, the values, and the beliefs. I think this is overlooked, the organizational culture and the imprinting that an organization can have, and how long it can take to actually overcome some of those kind of things, because it becomes a real challenge. Once you start to get off track, it can be a challenge. So let me just conclude, with Professor Nash. She's on the faculty at Harvard, and she talked about, and I like this because these are just practical questions that we can ask ourselves. Is it right? Is it fair? Am I hurting anybody? Could I disclose this to the public or to my mentor? Could I tell a close personal friend or perhaps a family member? And, does it pass the stink test? Usually, here, what I also like to emphasize is my lived experience has been that you need to trust your instincts. And I think a lot of us, I can just put myself in the category, when I have made and I have chose to make bad ethical decisions, it is not that I didn't have a little voice inside saying, "Hey, wait a minute. Have you thought about that?" Now, did I reflect on it, this and that? No, I just discarded it immediately. And so, what I'm suggesting here is that um, as we think about, and if we go back to decision making, and we go back to pressure, and we go back to particular contexts and circumstances, I think our challenge or opportunity is to recognize when we're coming up against something like that. And I like to say, don't lean in, lean back, and try to get some time and space in between some of those before you have to make a decision or suggest, hey, that's a great point, let me think more about that, get back to you. My point is, create space. When you get that sense, this intuition or your instinct kicks in, I think it's really important to not discount that. So that's what I had for us. So I'll end where I started. I mean, I'm surely not perfect. I've made my share of mistakes, but if we can think what it means to behave ethically, if we can commit to acting ethically and make a commitment ahead of time, I think it makes it easier to make the right set of choices under the circumstances. So that's what I have for you. I've got my email here. Let me stop sharing. I know Kim will post this, and we'll get an opportunity for folks to you know to uh, um, ask some questions here. And I've turned my camera back on, so I don't know if folks have comments they would like to make, or perhaps ask a specific question in the context of something. It looks like, Kim, we have a fairly large group, 52.
Yep.
So
So we want to thank you, Dr. Russell, and we will go and take some questions. We have about 10 minutes left in our session. So just make sure if you have any questions, you type them in the question and answer box, and then I will read them so they can remain anonymous if you care to have it be that way. I know ethics, a lot of issues sometimes people don't want to bring out specifically, but one question that I have, Dr. Russell, is have you seen that in good times or in bad times, economic times, there is an inclination to more unethical behavior? Like during the pandemic, when, your first chart on the intensity things where people are more worrying about their keeping their job or their personal financial situation, that do you think there's any kind of a correlation between what's happening in the economy, what's happening in our country, and people's ethical behaviors?
yeah, I mean, I'm not a behavioral scientist, so I mean, I can't tell you quantitatively. It would seem to me that um, these kind of they're situational, and so everybody's situation can be different. So I think that some of the disproportionate impact of the pandemic clearly has taken its toll on a disproportionate number of people. I do think, I mean, take for example, if you're in the healthcare profession or in the teaching profession, K through 12. I mean, this has been a rough run for everybody. The demand on the folks, the demand on the digital side for, let's say, K through 12, and I think that's created perhaps perspectives on people that aren't fair. That it's just not. And I think it feeds to some of the polarization. I think of like how we think and treat other people, and so no, I think they're correlated. But again, let me just qualify it by saying I'm sharing, kind of not as an expert or studied in the field, but some of my observations that I've seen. I do think that if you're an organization and you're in the private side, or you're a public nonprofit and you've got significant cash flow problems, meaning, can you sustain yourself and remain an ongoing concern? I think that those are big challenges. I think it's those really will test the core of any group of individuals. I think, particularly those that are highly competitive and want to continue and to succeed. So
So I have another, and since there's no other questions coming in here, I'll just ask one more. So if you observe an unethical situation or are caught in an ethical situation, how's the best way to handle it? You said reporting it. Is it reporting it to an authority? Is it going to a superior? I mean, what's the best way to try to deal with it? Do you deal with it the person one on one first? What are your suggestions there? Because
yeah,
we all
Kim.
get caught in
Yeah.
those situations, and you think you should do something, but the question is, what do you do?
Yeah, no, Kim, let me first thank you. That is an excellent question. And what I can my advice would be as follows. It depends. I think you have to do my observation is one is to make sure that the set of circumstances that you're in, you're looking at them correctly and seeing them correctly. And so part of that to me would be um, reaching out to a trusted friend and mentor to test this against to see if you're looking, because I've seen it where some start with an intent that they're being unethical and they proceed that way, and then it makes the resolution difficult because sometimes the optics on all of it aren't 100% correct. Now some of this it might not be the case, but my point on this is I think it's really important to be clear-headed about it to the extent that you can and consult a trusted friend or mentor. Now, like if you would ask me that question, I can tell you specifically at this institution, I would strongly encourage you to talk to somebody in HR. That's if somebody would come to me, or if you would ask the advice I give my colleagues here where I work, I say talk to our HR professionals because they can listen, but they also know the meat and give you feedback if you want it, but they also know what other resources would be available. Now some organizations have an ethic mailbox. They have an email address. There's a whole number. I think even the U.S. Department of Transportation and FHWA has places that you can anonymously put things in. There's various resources that you can follow. So I think that I get. I think Kim, part of your point is the safe space and the fear of retaliation, and so what I'm suggesting here is try to be clear what you think the issues are. Make sure that you work with it. I would suggest a trusted friend. Make sure you've got the context situated right, and then I would explore the appropriate paths and in a circumstance it might be a direct communication. So let's just take somebody that uses language inappropriate, or that is excessively, could be towards a gender, could be foul language. Those, I mean, part of that it's not a for me anyways. It has been raising this in a way that somebody says, I don't appreciate when you do that, and I just want you to know how I feel. That's part and parcel different than getting in a big argument with some personalities that you'll never solve. Now, you might consult your HR and they might give you different counsel, or there might be a way to work through the supervisor. But that would be an example that I would give that I think you want to be measured and you don't want to stand by and take things. That's not right. And you shouldn't have to do that. But thinking through how you want to do that and what makes the most sense and to me the end game is to get it resolved, to get the behaviors adjusted or corrected. And sometimes you won't control all of those things. There's a lot more work being done in the hostile and intimidating work environment, for example, and some of these spaces that I mentioned discrimination, sexual discrimination. I mean, some of these things are not new and they still occur today, and they're very difficult issues. And so they have to be addressed. So again, I apologize. I'm kind of going on and on here, but I would just strongly encourage you to be clear what you think it is, consult a friend, and then I would look for resources in your organization and then try to follow those in terms of advice and suggestions that in terms of next steps. And where it is where you feel strongly, you're going to likely have to file a claim, and that'll have to be reviewed by someone and adjudicated as such.
Great advice. And I think yeah, like you said, talking to someone and making sure that you're got a base and a foundation for what your situation is gives you a little bit more confidence moving forward, that if you've bounced it off of someone first. So we did have one comment that from Tony. He wanted to say thanks for the creating space idea. I think that is, and I agree with him completely. He said it's normal for people to want to address issues in the moment, but you to step back and create some space and think about it before you do anything is probably a good idea for us. You said, what did you suggest? Lean back rather than leaning in
Yeah.
first, and that makes a big difference. So if we don't have any other questions, is there anything else you wanted to cover before we wrap up? Or
Yeah, and I just did see a couple of. I mean, my understanding, Kim, is that they'll post the slides. So if you have any questions, my email's on there. Feel free to use them. I frequently have asked people have asked, "Hey, we're going to use this internally and talk about this at one of our brown bags." You're free to use any of that information that makes sense and consult me if you'd like any additional information. No, what I would say is that Kim, I think that I've always been honored to be asked to come to this particular summit and workshop. I think the work of inclusiveness, diversity, and equity are really, really important. And I think we're all in this together as a community. And I think ethics has got a community element to it too. How we work and treat each other, how we work together as a profession, how we're helping serve the folks, our ultimate clients and customers, I think really matters. And one of the things that I wasn't going to share, but I'll share it. One of my long term mentors, and I know we've got 2 minutes, was Oscar Bolt. Oscar Bolt, second generation in the Bolt company up in Appleton, Wisconsin. In fact, I don't normally do this, but I'm going to read this. This is, and I was going through some notes the other day and actually preparing for this. And one of the things that he told students in a scholarship meeting in 2006 was, I would like to close by suggesting a need in your life to work on ethics. Somehow you have to embrace and enjoy being honest. You need to have high ethical nature, which is an example to others. If you are in pursuit of ideals which enable you to be competitive and fair in your chosen field, then your future and that of the country can be fully achieved and as bright as ours, and perhaps though it'll be even more challenging. And Oscar was a World War II veteran, and I don't normally read stuff like that, but I just really thought, um, I've been reflecting on this thing of needing to embrace and enjoy being honest. I mean, and sometimes I'm not honest with myself. And when I'm saying this thing about lying and I'm not pointing to everybody else. I think this thing of like, am I honest and truthful all the time? And so that just made me reflect back to who are our role models and like how we're working towards ethical practice. So let me close there and thank you, Kim, and of course Rosalind and the team. And I've always appreciated being part of this. And if I can be of further help, let me know. And wish all of you a great day.
Thank you, Dr. Russell. We really appreciate your comments, and that was a great closing. So what I just want to say is Keisha did put the link to the evaluation for this survey in the chat box. We'd appreciate if everyone could fill out the evaluation. So it's our goal to try to make this conference better each and every year, and we welcome your suggestions. So thank you very much for attending today. We appreciate it. And then remember to send Rosalind an email, which I also have in the chat box, to get your PDH certificates for your ethics credit. Thank you very much.